Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel.
The following is a true story. The real events you are about to hear contains content that is unsuitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
He returned to duty, and on his very first foot patrol, an old Russian landmine was hooked up to two 15-gallon jugs of homemade high explosives.
Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 18 reminds us to be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. In the Bible, we are reminded to put on the full armor of God. The following stories are real, raw, and exemplify the glory of God. While some denounce the power of prayer, we must never underestimate the impact God has on our lives. Through all of life's trials and tribulations, we must stand against the wiles of the devil and wrestle against spiritual wickedness in high places. This Pray.com series exemplifies the true heart of ex-military members who so proudly wear the protection that is provided to them, known as the armor of God.
My name is Sarah Verado. I am the proud caregiver and wife to retired Army Sergeant Michael Verado. Mike and I met at a small high school in Rhode Island when we were 14 and 15 years old. We were there during the events of September 11th, and when our country was attacked, for Michael, it was like many warfighters of his generation. It was his call to serve and wear the nation's uniform. And not long after high school graduation, and when he had completed the many steps to be able to enlist, including surgeries to fix a pre-existing condition, which is really crazy when I share with you later what his military service has entailed. Mike was proud to enlist and so proud to wear the uniform as an infantryman, as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne. I have certainly learned a lot in bearing witness to the sacrifices that he continues to make. And I need to tell you a little bit about his military service and what that has looked like for us as a couple, for us as a family. Michael deployed to Afghanistan in August of 2009 to conduct combat operations. It was a very difficult deployment, and they were hit with an invisible enemy, improvised explosive devices, IEDs. They had a high casualty rate, and they had an enemy they couldn't directly engage. Talk about having to take every step with faith over fear. And Michael and his brothers did. Michael's squad leader was killed in late March of 2010, Staff Sergeant Scott Brunkhorst, and Michael was wounded for the first time on April 10th, 2010, when he was riding in a vehicle as the gunner, and they hit a roadside IED. He was ejected out. He suffered some injuries. He was actually in the turret, and Michael was blown out with the turret about 30 feet, and he was banged up badly enough that he was medically evacuated. When he was medically evacuated, he was treated and evaluated for his injuries, and he was given the choice to return to the United States to heal, or to go back to the fight and try to bring that fight right to the enemy. When Michael was recovering, Joey Karen had been killed from their unit, and Joey's coffin was processed through Kandahar, where Mike was recovering. Mike took his hand and he put it on Joey's coffin, and he vowed that he would return to the fight with their brothers and that he would get these evil people who had done this. The thing that haunts my husband to this day is that he was never able to fulfill that promise. Mike returned to unit. He returned to duty. And on his very first foot patrol, just 14 days later, they were taking a wall. He was the 8th guy over it. And an old Russian landmine was hooked up to 2 15-gallon jugs of homemade high explosives. He was hit again. It immediately ripped off his left leg, much of his left arm, left him with serious polytraumatic conditions. He required a field blood transfusion to be kept alive at one point, and his condition was listed as death imminent. His squad leader would later tell me that when he put Mike on the bird, he never thought he'd see him again, because how could someone survive those injuries? But the very first hurdle that Michael jumped was, despite being expected to be dead on arrival, and despite the fact that he flatlined several times in the air, Michael was alive when the medical flight landed. Michael was in a coma through Germany and all the way through Walter Reed. He woke up 8 days later, and he felt a tremendous sense that he had been taken out of the fight, that the enemy had gotten one over on him, that the Taliban had won, that he was 0 and the Taliban was 1. It was devastating, absolutely devastating to him. Michael and I both grew up Catholic and certainly relied heavily on faith, but it was faith that we would harness so much more in the years to come and in our adult life than we could have ever imagined. Faith that went far beyond CCD and going to church on Sunday. It really meant living life according to Scripture, living life leaning into His promises to us. And I think we know sometimes that's easier said than done. In terms of shaping experiences that I revisit often, one would think that for Michael and for me, the most difficult time would be early on in his recovery. The first time I was going to really be able to see Michael post-injury. He wanted to make sure that I knew the full extent of his injuries. This is not a life that Michael wanted for me. Michael has always been selfless and determined and stubborn, but shy and quiet and sweet and committed. Michael is the most selfless person I have ever known, and that was true even prior to his military service. He is someone who is kind and good to his core. I think often about what recovery has looked like for Michael and continues to look like. We are often in a situation that feels tenuous at best and dire on the worst days. I am proud, among other things, that we live our wedding vows of sickness and in health every single day. There is far more sickness than health. About a year ago, Michael was recovering from his 120th surgery post-Afghanistan. Take a second and imagine what that much anesthesia and recovery and being spliced and diced open does to someone. Michael's initial injuries were catastrophic. Limb loss and burns and polytrauma and damage to his airways and his eardrums blown out. But I very naively believed, as did Michael, that he'd get some cool prosthetic gear and we would be on our way and life would be pretty normal. That could not have been further from the truth. In terms of the experiences that I revisit often, I think to some of those really dark, dire days in hospital waiting rooms. I think of times before our children were born and early years when it was just me and Michael. I think back to a time, and it's very painful for me to think this way, but I think back to a time when I believed that we had our whole lives ahead of us because of medical conditions and declines. We live in a state now where memories often feel more secure than the future does. I think back to being in a hospital waiting room in Texas and a doctor saying to me, I was going to have to do the most difficult thing. And all I could think was, oh my goodness, what now? And she said, you are going to have to help him learn to survive surviving. And we work every single day at surviving. I think of more recently after the births of our children, which were these beautiful, miraculous days. We have 3 little girls, and their names are Grace, Mary Scott, and Elizabeth. And Mary Scott is named for Mike's squad leader who was killed. I think of their births. I think of the life we have built, and I take in the absolute miracle of it. The fact that God has had his hand on us so firmly every single step of the way. Of the fact that God knew we needed to grow our family and grow it quickly. We were blessed with 3 girls in just 3 years and 4 days. Where life is medically now, that would not be a reality for us. And there is peace, incredible peace in knowing that God has a plan far greater than we can ever imagine. I think of those days, and I still have days like that. Michael still has days like that where things seem dire. There have been times in the last several years where I didn't know if he would see it to the next day. And I remember one time we were in a military hospital not too long ago, and things felt very dire, very, very dire. And I got on my knees outside his room, and I kept saying to myself, blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her. And I must have said it 200 times because I believe that to be true. I believe that to my bones. The story that I am writing now and what chapter is next, I am constantly evolving, learning to lean in, learning to trust. I'm learning that the plan we want, the one we may rewrite over and over and over again when situations change, is not the plan that God has for us. That talking to God and begging God, God, please fix this. God, please make this okay. He already has. And there is such incredible peace in that. I am blessed to work every single day to advocate and serve our nation's catastrophically wounded veterans and their caregivers. Wearing our nation's uniform was the honor of Mike's lifetime. There's nothing that he is prouder of than that time. And that's why caring for him, being his wife, and walking this journey is the honor of my lifetime.
Hello guys, thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more videos. Bye!